Hi, I wanted to do a video on PMDD and PTSD because I have those two diagnoses, and I, let's see, I've been watching other people's videos for about 7 months now, and they've been extremely helpful and inspiring, so I wanted to try it because I thought it would really help me and it might help others. And what I did was I posted my first videos during PMDD. So I went back and looked at them, and I wasn't really comfortable with revealing that much information to the public when I was in the throes of premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and we'll get more into that. There are some great videos that define it. It's like PMS, but it's like a PTSD flashback also. It's like an amygdala hijack. Judgment is difficult to find, and I feel really aggressive. I could tell I was aggressive by the video I made, and I've taken them down. So I don't think there's necessarily such a problem with being aggressive, but it needs to be somewhat controlled and appropriate. And I felt really afraid to have those videos up. So I eliminated that vulnerability. So I really want to express my gratitude to other people that inspired me, and I'll mention some of them in this video and future videos. I have some notes that I'm looking at over here. So like now that I'm through premenstrual dysphoric time period, I'm feeling much better and have much more clarity. And I learned so much from the videos that I made during it. So I wanted to reevaluate my approach and try again. And since this just came up for me and I've been wanting to talk about it for so long, I chose to do my do-over on PMDD and PTSD. So how I want to talk about this is from a systems thinking perspective, and I want to look at the power structures in it because narcissistic abuse is about manipulating power, and that's what I've experienced from my father, who is a state trooper, and my mom, who's now a Jehovah's Witness, which is kind of the biggest way she defines herself right now. And I'll get more into that in other times. And I've had some struggles with other relationships, whether they are like boyfriend relationships or friendships or housemates. So these individual situations of narcissistic abuse and sociopathic abuse, emotional abuse, antisocial personality disorders, they amplify to our society, and I'm sure, I mean, I know other people are awakening to this too. And that's kind of why it's so exciting to see so many great videos, so many well-organized videos and heartfelt videos going out there, and why I really wanted to join in and try. And this is amazing accountability for myself, and I really hope that maybe others will get something from this, other women with PMDD, and men too, because it certainly affects them. Alright, so yeah, from a systems perspective, and looking at the power structures, being able to name them, because knowing those vocabulary and those root sources, that's how we can go in and change things, fix them. And I want to talk about some research on PMDD and PTSD, and just go through it chronologically, so I'm going to read some stuff. And when it comes to power structures, there's a great framework from S. Lukes from 1973, Power, a Radical View. And you can think in general for a framework of 3 kinds of power: decision-making, non-decision-making, and shaping desires. Decision-making is very visible, formal, and unifying. Non-decision-making is a power to set agendas. It's more exclusive, more informal and influential. And then shaping desires is embedded in the ideology or belief systems. It's like a world view, and it's a routine that everyone just carries out. So thinking about when we go through PMS and our PMDD and PTSD, I'm going to be calling out some names, who's saying what, and who's making money off of it. The decision-making power is the behavior you see in participants is making decisions and implementing them, and having a power over resources with which to reward. Excuse me. The non-decision making may be more covert and hidden, and conflicts may be kept covert and hidden. And the agenda is kind of the routine, everyday dealings of organizations, the views in the organization, the groupthink, maybe. And then shaping desires, the behavior you'll see, how cultures and structures are reinforced, the role of history in shaping cultural norms, people's preferences. Where do those preferences come from? Think about advertising. So, again, that's Luke's 1973, and it's a power framework. So, now, let's go to, is PMDD real? There is some debate. In 2002, Daw wrote for the American Psychological Association, 3 to 9% of women experience it. The main diagnostic criteria is the interruption in the daily routines. I can definitely attest to losing time before my period. It's like I don't even realize I'm losing it. I'm just so caught up and emotional and overloaded and tired. And it definitely causes me work days. So, We have a quote from Jean Endicott, PhD, at Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. It's a real biological condition for which women seek treatment and for which effective treatments are available. Moving on, Joan Chrysler from Connecticut College says PMS and PMDD are both culture-bound syndromes. And then Paula Kaplan, PhD, and author of They Say You're Crazy, says there's no evidence that PMDD exists, though people have to find such evidence. She goes on to say it is really appalling that using PMDD for women who want recognition for discomfort is a very clear message that goes something like, okay, we'll believe you are feeling bad if we get to call you mentally ill for feeling bad. And can you imagine if we did that to men? So there is some debate and going on. It is in the DSM-4 and 5 under mood disorders, and here, this is 2002, so this is a little bit old. Endicott and a panel of experts determined in 1999 that PMDD is a distinct clinical entity based on studies that examined that suggested PMDD sufferers have normal functioning of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis, which we hear about in PTSD. And they show biological characteristics generally related to the serotonin system and a genetic component unrelated to major depression. Excuse me. What I'm getting at is the roundtable group, which included psychiatrists, psychologists, and a representative from Eli Lilly, the company that makes pharmaceuticals. They cited studies that showed at least 60% of patients respond to SSRIs as an evidence that PMDD is a distinct clinical entity. So they use drug treatment as evidence that it exists. Just check in my technology since I sometimes have to do take 1, 2, and 3. Kaplan, the author of They Say You're Crazy, believes the language surrounding PMDD is misleading and that its classification as a psychiatric disorder stigmatizes women as mentally ill and covers up the real reasons of women's anguish. And by including it in the DSM-4, she says emotional displays that are considered normal in men are seen as mental disorders in women. And then Kaplan cites research that demonstrates without question that PMDD is neither valid nor helpful. And they had a group of women keep checklists of symptoms. In the end, these checklists failed to differentiate between PMDD and not having PMDD. And an interesting thing was that men participated and their checklists also didn't differ from the women's checklists of symptoms. Going on, research is increasingly showing that women who seek treatment for PMDD are often abused. Next heading, enter the drug treatments. The medications are approved by the FDA as of, that was 2002, and that was Sarafem and Zoloft. Sarafem was repackaged Prozac after Eli Lilly ran out of their patent. I beg your pardon. Prozac's patent expired, and then Eli Lilly copied it and renamed it Sarafem. They spent $33 million promoting drugs to consumers and sold 200,000 prescriptions in 2002. and then Zoloft was also approved. One expert named Hartledge, I think she is from a university. You guys can look this up. You can look up DAW 2002. Her fear was that without the psychiatric disorder classification, women who are truly suffering may be discounted. So it's a way to catch this situation. And then Chrysler ends up saying, if a woman tells you she has PMS or PMDD, therapists should be supportive and shouldn't assume that it's just a hormonal thing and nothing can be done about it. They should ask about stress and explore some other things. So this article caught my eye several years ago when I got my PMD diagnosis, probably about 6 years ago, while I was in therapy and while I had cPTSD. I mean, I had been telling the same stories and news stories about all these covert abuses and not so covert in my family, and having debilitating cramps and mood swings. But I only got the PMD diagnosis, and I did not get a cPTSD diagnosis until 2015. In 2009, there was some more research and some updates, and here I'd like to go into some physiology a little bit. And what they're finding is the role of steroids in their metabolites like estrogen, progesterone, and allopregnanolone. And they realized they didn't really know how gonadal steroid production might lead to the expression of symptoms. And in non-symptomatic women, administration of progesterone during the follicular phase was enhancing amygdala reactivity. So we know about the amygdala hijack in cPTSD when we're having a flashback and our attention is drawn to the reptilian brain, as it's sometimes referred to, and out of the prefrontal lobe where we have logic and can make reasonable decisions. The symptomatic women for PMDD are theorized to have an inadequate different steroids and metabolites, like GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, and rodent stress studies that involve social isolation found irregularities in GABA activity. And GABA is an over-the-counter supplement for relaxation. So isolation causing irregularities. Isolation is what we do when we have PTSD and when we have PMDD sometimes. So that could actually mess up our steroids, our hormones. Also, greater variability in thyroid indices in PMDD susceptible women was observed. Circadian rhythm alterations, aberrations of hormone secretion, advanced timing rhythmicity for melatonin, cortisol, thyroid stimulating hormone, and prolactin. Another thing was that intercellular differences in magnesium in the presence of normal plasma levels have been reported in women with PMS. I saw this about magnesium, and then after that I saw the video about supplements for PTSD that Battle Hymn of the Empath put out. And I really recommend you go find her videos about supplements for cPTSD. That's Battle Hymn of the Empath. And what she was saying was that magnesium affects the uptake of lithium, and lithium is a critical element for regulating our brain activity. And I need to learn more about that. I'm excited to learn more about it because it's a naturally occurring salt. And, remember, Eli Lilly is the one who makes the SSRIs, and we don't know how responsible they are all the time. And then there are the neurotransmitters for PMDD, which are clearly implicated because of the mood and behavioral symptoms. These emotions and behaviors are affected by levels of sex steroids, which easily pass the blood-brain barrier. Sex steroid receptors are plentiful, for example, in the amygdala and hypothalamus, brain regions that moderate emotions and behavior. So there's starting to look like a lot of chemistry going on when it comes to PMDD as well. Levels of the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate fluctuate during the menstrual cycle. And the luteal phase levels of glutamate and creatine plus phosphocreatine in the medial prefrontal cortex are lower for all women. So the juices to the prefrontal lobe are reduced. So it's no wonder, it's not like a choice that we decided to give everyone a really hard time. It's a chemistry thing. And then I wanted to add that creatine is something that helps with muscle contraction. And the source for creatine is carbohydrates and fats. That's really general. So when you have these cravings for, potato chips and chocolate, that's your body is getting ready to do work. So it's nothing to be ashamed of. That's why I want to say that. That's why I'm putting this video out, is because there's so much shame around PMS, let alone premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and there are plenty of videos you can watch where women are talking about how they're suffering. So that's what motivated me to want to talk about some of these logical reasons. Women with PMD also had lower levels of cortisol and beta endorphins, shorter pain thresholds and tolerance times, higher blood pressure levels at rest and during pain testing. And these findings implicate the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis in PMDD pain sensitivity, which is consistent with the findings of potential HPG axis dysregulation in depressive and mood disorders. So not only do we have the HPA axis going for cPTSD once a month for a week to 10 days, we also have the HPG axis going off. The double whammy. It's probably more than double. It's probably more like exponential. So that was in 2009 they started figuring out some of these chemistry things. 2011, Pilver, the author is Corey Pilver, and they're from the Veterans Association and Yale University. They cite that 6.8% of Americans will be diagnosed with PTSD as a substantial health burden, a substantial public health burden. And what those of us who have it, and what the YouTube videos are saying and others, is that it's probably underreported. And if narcissistic personality disorders, certainly underreported and underdiagnosed, then you would think the victims of the cluster B disorders are also underreported. So it encompasses affective and somatic changes. And using 2000 census data, Halbrecht and colleagues estimated the disability-adjusted life years attributable to PMDD in the USA to be 14.5 million. To put this figure in context, the disability-adjusted life years associated with all neuropsychiatric conditions in the United States, excluding PMD, was 4.8 million. So 14.5 million disability-adjusted life years for PMDD, 4.8 million for all the other neuropsychiatric conditions combined. This is starting to look to me like the non-decision-making power, the invisible, covert power, because where do we see this in the news, ever? Right. It's unclear if these studies whether the effect of PTSD would remain significantly associated with PMDD, and more research is needed to determine whether PTSD remains associated with PMDD. The goal of this study was to untangle the relationship, basically which comes first, the PMDD or the PTSD, or does PMDD make you more susceptible to PTSD should you encounter abuse or witness it. And there had been previous studies, but there were some gaps that made them inconclusive or not as usable. This study had 3,698 participants. Among trauma survivors, the vast majority of women selected a primary trauma as the worst and only event they had experienced, and less than 10% of the trauma survivors reported experiencing a single trauma. The majority of trauma survivors experienced multiple traumas, and this is similar to narcissistic abuse. Obviously, it's multiple traumas. So the majority of the people also experience multiple traumas. I'm skipping a few things. Try to keep this as short as possible. The individual survey modules contain questions that corresponded to the DSM-4. The thing is, they had a list of traumas that people had to check off the box for. There were 22 potentially traumatic events that were on the list that were more typical. And individuals who didn't report any one of these events were characterized as having no trauma. And then if they couldn't select a worst trauma, one was selected at random. So it is a little bit shaky on what kind of trauma, but that may not really be necessary to get the point across. And then women who had a lifetime history of trauma with PTSD were significantly more likely than women with no history of trauma to report PMDD. Women who had a lifetime history of trauma but did not meet diagnostic criteria for PTSD were also significantly more likely than women with no history of trauma to have PMDD. And consistent with their second hypothesis, the independent association between PTSD and PMDD was not fully accounted for by the characteristic of the trauma, the worst event type, or the number of traumatic experiences. So it's a gray area. what it comes down to is if you had trauma, you're likely to have PMDD. Although worst event type was not significantly associated with PMDD, the participants reported number of traumatic events was strongly associated with PMDD. Wow, this is getting long. So what it comes down to here is that the Pilver report in 2011 concluded that PMDD was associated with PTSD. And the failure to assess and identify PMDD in an affected patient may thwart clinicians' attempts to treat their PTSD. And clinicians are advised to have patients track their symptoms of PTSD and PMDD. In future research that utilizes prospective designs and physiological measures of autonomic nervous system regulation, such as heart rate variability, may provide more insight into the mechanisms that link trauma and PTSD to PMDD and premenstrual symptoms. So it's the autonomic nervous system, again, what we were saying, the HPA axis, and now the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, where the sex steroids come from. So there is a little bit of like non-decision making power going on there, because these guys, I mean, it's up to the scientists to decide what to study, right? What questions to ask. And we can see they kind of missed some spots here and there. They also only did a 1-month study, and when you have 2 ovaries, it changes every other month how the PMDD may turn out. This year in May, Department of Psychiatry, yeah, getting a little tired of reading, University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill did a study with the objective being individual differences in sensitivity to cyclical changes in ovarian steroids, estradiol, known as E2, and progesterone, known as P4, have been implicated in the pathophysiology of menstrually related mood disorder. So I'm not sure if they updated PMDD to MRMD. Sounds close enough. No prospective studies have investigated psychosocial risk factors for sensitivity to the hormone effects on mood in MRMD. So using a repeated measures approach and multi-level models, they tested the hypothesis that a history of abuse provides a context in which elevations of estradiol and progesterone predict daily symptoms. So they had 66 women. They did a trial on oral contraceptives. They assessed lifetime physical and sexual abuse, and they took blood measurements around the 5 days of the menstrual cycle. They found that in women with a history of physical abuse, cyclical increases in progesterone predicted greater mood and interpersonal symptoms on the 3 days following the blood sample. In women with a history of sexual abuse, cyclical increases in estradiol predicted greater anxiety symptoms in the 3 days following the sample. And they found the need for future research, and that abuse may influence the link between hormones and symptoms. So it's nice to have this information out there, and it took a little while to get at it. I have to open up another file that I really want to tell you about, because it talks about the power structures. So in 2006, financial ties between DSM-4 panel members and the pharmaceutical industry. Here we have a conflict of interest. I'm going to read this abstract. It's 4 paragraphs. Increasing attention has been given to the transparency of potential conflicts of interest in clinical medicine and biomedical sciences, particularly in journal publishing and science advisory panels. So what I just said a minute ago was there's some covert power in the journal publishing because the researchers get to pick the questions, and sometimes they pick the questions based on what the funding will allow them to get away with. Or, where, they're chasing money. The authors examine the degree and type of financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry of panel members responsible for revisions to the DSM. By using multimodal screening techniques, the authors investigated the financial ties to the pharmaceutical industry of 170 panel members who contributed to the DSM-4. Of the 170 panel members, 95 of them, which is a 56%, had one or more financial associations with companies in the pharmaceutical industry. 100% of the members of the panels on mood disorders and schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders had financial ties to drug companies. And the leading categories of financial interest held by panel members were research funding, consultancies, and speakers bureau. The conclusion is our inquiry into the relationship between DSM panel members and the pharmaceutical industry demonstrates that there are strong financial ties between the industry and those who are responsible for developing and modifying the diagnostic criteria for mental illness. The connections are especially strong in those diagnostic areas where drugs are the first line of treatment for mental disorders. Full disclosure by DSM panel members of their financial relationships with for-profit entities that manufacture drugs used in the treatment of mental illnesses is recommended. This is Cosgrove et al. In 2006. Financial ties between DSM-4 panel members and the pharmaceutical industry. So, I wanted to share these power structures and these evidences of power structures that are visible power, which is the DSM-4. It's what everybody gets. It's official. But then there's these non-decision-making, covert power structures behind the scenes. And what this amounts to is shaping desires of women and men and everyone about how do we handle this? What is normal? What the fuck is wrong with people? And giving people like a tool or a weapon to stigmatize and decrease power. I'm just going to check my notes, see if I have covered some points. Another resource I really wanted to bring up was, so we get told there's something wrong with us, we go to a therapist because that's what you get all your courage up to be able to do. And I really encourage folks to look up Annabelle Lee's recent video on therapists because she has a really great point about so many types of therapy being focused on changing the individual in therapy without focusing on stopping the trauma. And again, some of the drugs and treatments for PMDD don't really get at the root cause. And the other thing is, I want to avoid black and white thinking because that's part of my healing process. And there is value in all of these conversations. I mean, is PMDD real or not? There's value in bringing that to light and arguing that point. And I appreciated being diagnosed with it because somebody was acknowledging what a really difficult time I was having every month, and the danger that could that could bring up. One woman with a video on YouTube said, like, if someone offends you, you will tear their head off. And I was also watching Bill Burr the other night, kind of forcing myself to watch comedy instead of videos about narcissistic abuse to sort of change up my chemistry, I hope, for the better. So I was watching Bill Burr, and he has a little skit where he's talking about, skit's not the right word, you know, just being pissed off about people in the way and population growth. And, like, if you're driving down the road, you know, this way, it's like a normal day. Go over a little bit like this, you become famous for either crashing, for crashing, and whatever the consequences are. But if you just move your hand, you know, an inch to the left and go straight, it's no big deal. You know, no news there. Why do I bring that up? I forgot now. So please take a look at Annabelle Lee's videos on therapy and keep in mind about these power structures. I think that will help us find a way to intervene in the system, because it's just so awesome, kind of the awakenings going on to help intervene in our personal systems, and notice what's happening from the outside. But the narcissistic and antisocial personality disorders are societal now, and they're in our market system too, for all our goods and services. So I think knowing the framework from Luke's 1973 can help, and I will always try to incorporate that one in my videos about PTSD and PMDD. And in the future, I want to make a video of different ways to treat PMDD on your own, just practices, and you can look up, if you want to do supplements, I encourage you to go to your doctor, but if you want to learn about some things you might want to ask about, go to Battle Hymn of the Empath and watch her video. It's really good, and there are so many others out there. So, gosh, it's probably been a really long video. I wanted it to be short, but I had a lot to cover, and I wanted to offer something valuable. And I did take down my other videos to introduce myself, and I think that was probably the right idea, just because it was PMDD when I put them up. So I think I have a lot more clarity now. I hope this helps. Others have certainly helped me a ton. So thank you very much, and be well.